All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Carr. This is 3D art for 2D artists. This is a talk that I gave this year at CTN 2024. And I've had a few requests um, from attendees to get their hands on the slides for this presentation. And I looked at the slides and at the end of the day, I thought that they wouldn't make much sense if you were going back through them without context. They were kind of designed for me to just be speaking over them, so I thought that it would be more useful to you if I just went through the presentation again, narrated over it much like I did at CTN, and hopefully you guys will get something out of it. So 3D art for 2D artists, how to stop worrying and play in the third dimension. All right, so the only software that you need is even a strong word, is I would say Blender and Krita. Both are free and open source software. Blender is the software that I use for all of my 3D work, and Krita is a free and open source competitor to Photoshop. I've been using Photoshop for over a decade now, and I'm trying to quit. I'm on a journey. So far, Krita has been pretty nice, and so if you don't want to pay for expensive subscription, go check out Krita. It's free and open source, and so far it's been great to use. All right, let's continue. See if I can find the continue button. There we go. So who's this guy? This is me. My name's Dave Carr. Some people call me Cave. If you see me in an industry event and you call me Cave, bonus points for you. My current gig is I'm a senior art director at Reddit Inc. And here are all my socials: Instagram, email, website. So the first question most people ask is, what does an art director at Reddit do? And I make this guy. This is Snoo. He is the mascot and the logo. So yeah, I'm the guy who redesigned the logo. If you dislike it, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry for what I did. I'll try and do better next time. But yeah, it's a fun gig. Everything is very cute and playful, and this is like a very standard 3D pipeline. With a lot more advanced features. So don't worry, we're not going to be talking about this. We're going to be talking about some other easier methods. I'm also an indie game developer, and this is my current game, Icaro. So if this looks interesting to you, reach out and ask me about Icaro. So 3D is magic, you guys. I want to start out with my story about how I broke in. So I started out as a 2D artist in 2014, and I spent years trying to break in. Like, let's see, maybe, depending on how you count it, somewhere between 6 and 8 years I spent trying to break into the industry. But art is hard. I spent a lot of mental energy. So like when you work in 2D, it's about creating an illusion of space on a 2D plane, right? And I spent so much mental energy just trying to get this illusion to be convincing that it was hard to juggle everything else. And every new piece was stressful and tiring, and it wasn't a joyful activity anymore. So I started out using 3D, and I intended it to just be a perspective crutch, like lay out some like big cityscapes and then just paint over it. And then I thought, you know what? If I just, threw a sun lamp in here, it would help me figure out these shadows and like experiment with my composition. And then I was like, oh, if I could put the focal length of my cameras and do some interesting perspective tricks. And then, if I just add a little color and a little love to these shaders, that looks pretty good. And then before you know it, now I'm a 3D generalist. So this is one of the first illustrations that I did when I was like tinkering around with 3D. So this is kind of where I started, and this is where I am now. Yeah, so this is a piece I did this year. Very complicated. There's a lot going on technically behind the scenes, but even this illustration has, we're going to be using a lot of the techniques that we're going over today. So why should you care about 3D? Well, first and foremost, and I mean this literally, is it's fun. Like, I have fun working in 3D, and that's why I do it all the time. So I would say give it a fair shake, and hopefully it's fun for you. And if it's not for you, if it's not fun, and you enjoy drawing or painting or doing some other medium more, then like, hey, you tried. Not everything's for everybody. It should be fun. I don't want to force people to do things that they don't think are fun. It reduces your cognitive load. You're juggling fewer balls. You're not thinking about perspective and how light is bouncing around. You're thinking about how to be a better designer instead. The animation pipeline is incorporating 3D sooner. So if you're a storyboard artist, it is not uncommon to hear that these days there will be a 3D mock-up set, and they're doing camera renders from the set, and then you're drawing over those camera renders, or there are even 2D drawing tools that work in 3D space, and so you might be boarding directly in 3D space. Flexibility with camera and lighting. So because the computer is doing the perspective and lighting work for you, you can experiment and do things that are more extreme than you might otherwise try. So like, for instance, you might not draw a complicated city scene with 3-point perspective or fisheye from like a crazy exaggerated camera angle, because the cognitive load of handling all of the vanishing points and perspective lines might be too daunting. But in 3D, go for it. It's super easy, and if it turns out better that way, then that's awesome. And then lastly, it looks cool. I think 3D art done well looks really cool, and when I work in 3D, I think what I make is better than what I can produce in 2D. So again, if that's not the case for you, if you're like, everything I make looks bad, again, maybe it's not for you. There's definitely something charming about 2D, and I love many 2D artists' work, but just for me, I am not capable of producing something that I love as much in 2D. So here's just a really quick demo showing where we're going. Here's a really crappy, crummy little sketch. Here's a man standing in front of a gate. Well, it's not even a man, nondescript person standing in front of a gate in 2D, and then boom, 3D, already playing with lighting. And then once you have that set up, you can iterate on it real fast. Super neat. This is a fun little exercise. I enjoy doing this a lot. All right, so I know what you're thinking. Isn't 3D hard? There's like these shader things I keep hearing about, and there's topology, and there's geometry nodes. Oh God. No, it's not too bad. What we're going to cover today, we're going to do 2 simple techniques where you don't have to worry about hardly any of that. And the stuff you do need to learn, I'll show you where to find them. All right, so method number 1, the cards. I call this the cards method, and this is primarily what I used to make this piece, which was an early concept piece for a video game. So what you need to know, you'll need to know basic navigation in Blender, importing images as planes, positioning your camera, playing with the lights, and then hitting the render button, which is just F12. I also have reliably heard that this method works just as well in Maya. There might be different keywords It may be slightly different operation-wise, but technically you should be able to get the same sort of outcome. All right, so here's the procedure. First and foremost, we're going to consider our composition, right? We're still making an illustration, and composition is still important. And while you can experiment and play in 3D, and sometimes you have happy accidents that way, I often find that I get to a better outcome more quickly when I have a good composition nailed down from the get-go. So consider your composition, still do those crappy thumbnails. Those are still important. Once you have your kind of planned illustration, you can make a list of all the assets that you need to make. Draw and paint those assets separately on layers, and we'll be exporting those. You'll see how that works. Then we'll jump into Blender, set up the camera. We'll bring in all of those little paintings that we did. We'll light it, we'll render it, and then we'll have an illustration. So, doing little paintings and exporting them in Blender. So here's just a little painting of a rock I did. Oh, pause. So here's some important things to note when you're doing these kind of paintings. One, you probably don't want strong light sources. You want a neutral diffuse lighting that'll roughly match your scene. If you do a slight top-down lighting without hard cast shadows, that'll probably be fine. So like I have this little rim, painted out on this lip with no hard cast shadows and a slight gradient. And that's pretty much all you need. Okay, so I have my amazing painting. Quick export. Remember where you save it out. Save, and you're done. So we'll go into Blender and we will Shift A and do image, images as planes. We'll go into where we saved it, and we'll just click on that PNG, and Blender will automatically bring that PNG in on a plane, so it's UV mapped to a plane, and the plane is going to be the same dimension as your canvas and whatever your 2D software is going to be. So here it is. Now I'm just going to duplicate it a bunch. And there you go. You got a Stonehenge. Okay, not super impressive, but if you think about it, you've just created an asset in 2D, and now we can play with it in 3D space without doing any modeling or any real shader work. And that's pretty cool. And you can do some squash and stretch and make some bigger and some smaller and mirror some, and before you know it, you've got your own composition. And that's what I did. So here's the asset that we painted. This was one of the first pieces I did when I was kind of figuring this workflow out. So you can see there are really not too many assets in here. There's a couple different variations of this like chunk that I built trees out of. There's a couple different rocks. There's some ferns. That's pretty much it. Some mist. I'm not gonna lie, that mist is a little more complicated. Don't worry about that. You could just paint that in afterwards. And then the little guy who I 3D modeled. But it really doesn't take too much to make a scene, really. So here's a slightly more advanced version of what we just did. So here's my rock. Instead of exporting the whole thing all at once, I'm going to export the layers to files, and it's really important that you have this PNG24 file type. And the reason is that will give you more, I think it's more information in the alpha channel of your PNG. So PNG, there's a red, blue, green channel and an alpha channel, and it will import a little more nicely in Blender. Without that, you might see some like weird fuzziness around the edges of your paintings. All right, so we're going back into 3D, and now instead of there being one PNG of a rock, now they're all going to be separate in separate files. So we'll bring all those in, import images as planes, And again, each plane is going to have the same aspect ratio as the as your Photoshop file or your 2D software file. And so you can just stack these up just like this, and everything should be more or less aligned to where it should be. So I just aligned those pieces, and I'm going to join those meshes together. And now I have the same rock as I did before, but because those pieces are offset a little bit, you can see some ambient occlusion between the layers, and also a little bit of parallaxing and a little bit of volume. So here's the old one we did previously just to compare them. A/B comparison, and you'll see there's more depth, right? There's more depth in that one. And even though I did this, I first started doing this a long time ago now, maybe 8 years ago now. There's still something kind of magical to it, to me. All right, so here's the last variation on the rock. I promise. I know it's getting a little old. And what's different about this one is, we're going to keep our rock painting, but then I'm going to I duplicated those layers, and then I separated them out, kind of like on a model sheet almost, where no layer is overlapping another one with important information. And we're going to export. We're just going to export this one layer, kind of like we did the first time. And we're going to export the whole rock onto one sheet. And it's going to seem a little convoluted why we would do this in the first place, but I promise it'll make sense. So for the third time, Shift A, import images as planes. We'll go to our folder. We'll bring that in. All right, so I'm going to, you can use a knife tool to do this, or you can do a loop cut if you've been very ordered with how you do your layout of your trim sheet. Oh, that's kind of maybe an important thing. So when you bring in painted assets and then kind of model with them, some people call that trim sheets. All right, so I've separated those out, and I'm gonna kind of delete. I'm gonna delete the pieces of the plane that don't have any paintings on them. Select them, delete them. I'm going to take these, I'm going to separate them out. So I'm hitting P to get this window. And so I'm separating those out, so each of them is kind of their own object. And now I'm going to spend a little time just stacking them in the same orientation as I did last time. All right, so I'm just kind of snapping them all to 0, 0, 0. And then I'm gonna, you can see how there's like some weird patterning going on. That is called, some people call it zebra patterning, or I've heard some people call it Z fighting. But basically, if you have two pieces of mesh that are occupying exactly the same area, you might get some weird patterning like that. Okay, so looks like my paintings are a little misaligned. I just have to go in and fix those. All right. Ideally, you'd spend a little more time getting these just right, but you get the idea, I think. So why did I go through all of the trouble of doing it this way? And the answer is over here. So this is the material slot for the object, and you'll see that there's only one shader being used. So whenever you bring an image into Blender, it's going to automatically create a shader for you and name it after the image file. So you can see this one has 4 different shaders for this object, and this one has only one shader for the other object. So you can imagine if you have a big scene with, like 50 of these objects in there, You might have 200 shaders and they'll all have like, crazy names that are hard to understand. So that's the most complicated way of doing it, but if you're going to do a big project, you'll thank yourself later. But you don't have to worry about it for now. If you just want to get started, that's fine. And here's another piece that's from the same kind of the same sequence when I was kind of test driving this process out. And you can see how you can take just these like little simple paintings, like just little strips, with a papery gradient on it and like a little bit of a toothy alpha, and then use those to build bigger, more complicated volumes, and then throw some lights around in there, and you're good to go. And then here's maybe a more complicated version of taking that and pushing it a little further. You can kind of mix this with more traditional modeling. So this rock, it's just like a traditionally modeled rock. And you can kind of mix and match the different approaches to get a really interesting effect. All right, so method 2, this is called, I call this the projected illustration method. So for this, you'll need to know all the other stuff, plus importing references, a little bit of basic modeling, assigning materials, and UV mapping using the project from view method. So the procedure is a little different because for this one, you need a finished illustration in mind. So this would be, you need a finished illustration before you start. So this method is better suited to a scenario where you have a sketch or a painting and you want to test out different lighting scenarios. So this one is a little more rigid. You can't really play with the camera angle as much. There's still some room for it, which we'll see later. But like in a production scenario where you're doing lighting keys on a sketch, that might be where it's more appropriate. So you'll make your illustration. You'll open up Blender and set up a camera. You'll import the illustration you just did as a reference, and then we're going to model a low poly version that's going to match our illustration from the perspective of the camera. I know that sounds a little complicated, but we'll go through it. You'll set the material of your low poly model. We'll unwrap and project it from view. We'll light the scene and we'll render it. Okay, so this painting was generously donated to me by my lovely friend Tanta V. She is amazing. Go follow her. Do it right now. But really, thank you, Tanta. If you ever see this, you're amazing. So what kind of paintings make good candidates for this method? Most importantly, I would say that they have neutral diffuse lighting. You don't want form shadows are good. And cast shadows are okay as long as they're not too crisp. So like there's like one crisp cast shadow in this painting, which, I guess there's this one. But this one under the handle is like a bigger deal. If you just did if you're to do this again, you could just do like a soft gradient here and that would be fine. And this isn't Tanta's fault. She didn't know that I was going to do this when she did this painting. I just asked her after. And you want a somewhat linear perspective. So that doesn't mean that when I say linear, I don't mean that things don't vanish out in the distance. You can totally do that. What I mean is that you don't want crazy, warped fisheye. And if you wanted to do something with crazy warped fisheye, you would do a really linear perspective like this, and then you would push it with the camera later. So you'll take your painting, and then we're gonna separate it out into components. So if there's things that you think you might move around, you might separate those to different layers, like this bike, or like these characters here, and that might make your life easier later on. So we'll set up our camera. We'll open up Blender, create a new camera, and it's really important. Oops, something just fell in my kitchen. It's really important that the resolution of your camera matches perfectly the resolution of your illustration, because you want it to match up 1-to-1. Now you can double the you can I shouldn't say the resolution, I should say the aspect ratio. So you could double the resolution when you render it. That's totally fine, but you just want it to be the same aspect ratio. And when you position the camera and you want to align it more or less so that the perspective of the 3D world matches the perspective of your reference. But when you go into camera view, you can do Shift A and import your reference, and it will line it up perfectly to your camera. Actually, let me just do that now. Here, let me see if I can get out of this real quick. Here, let's open up Blender. All right. Don't worry, my 3D file is going to look different than you guys', because I'm a nerd and I set it up that way. Okay, cool. So here's my camera, and I'm gonna just rotate it. Okay, so if you go into camera view, we're gonna do that by hitting 0 on the numpad. So we're in our camera view, and I'm just gonna bring in a reference. So I'll hit Shift A and do Image Reference. I'm just gonna find. I'll just do my desktop background. Uh-oh. Where's my camera? Okay, that's fine. I got lost in space for a second. Okay, so here is the reference. Here's the camera. So we can just drag this reference out in front of the camera a little bit. And now the reference is perfectly aligned to the camera. And you can even parent it if you want. So you could say like, click on the reference, hold Shift, click on the camera, and then do Control P for parent and set it to object. So now the reference is parented to the camera. So the camera moves, the reference moves. So what you could do is then go to your reference in this panel, and then we're going to say, we're going to set the depth and the side to front. That means that the reference is going to render in front of something, and that means like if we have, say, a cube, boop, drag it down, go to camera view, we can't see the cube because the reference is in front of the cube. And even if the cube is in front of the camera like this, it's a little confusing. Okay, so the cube is in front of the camera, right? The reference will still render in front of the camera, and that's important because we can then go to this reference and we can turn the opacity down, and now we can kind of model to match the reference. Cool. Now the last thing you might want to do is you might accidentally click on the reference when you're doing this and then like accidentally move it. So if you click this little arrow right here, that'll make it so you can't select the reference by accident. And if this little arrow isn't here, you can go down to the filter and toggle that arrow on, and it should show up. Okay. Well, that was a bonus because I did not do that in my presentation. So anywho, back to the slideshow. All right, so next we're going to model, we have our reference set up, and we're going to model a low poly version of our illustration, and we're going to use the illustration from the camera view as a guide. So on this bottom window right now, I'm looking through the camera, and then on this top window, I'm like looking outwards. So you can kind of see. So this is when the process was totally done when I took this screen grab. So you can see that there really is not a whole lot here. There's a couple boxes, some ledges, some planes, some cylinders, and a ground plane, and that's pretty much it. Very simple. So you want to use the camera to match your perspective, and you want to consider which volumes. Okay, so you might ask yourself, how do I know what to make a box and like what to just leave as a flat plane? And how do I know what detail is important to model versus to just leave simple? And I would say consider volumes that you want to cast shadows, and you model those volumes, and then consider which edges you might want to catch the light. So for instance, if something was shiny and you really like the edge of this box, and you really wanted it to catch the light, you might bevel this corner, because then the little bevel corner will catch the light. But mostly keep it simple. You don't want too much detail, especially in the beginning, right? Like, give yourself some easy victories in the beginning, and be kind to yourself, right? This is the longest part of the process, and it'll probably be the most frustrating because it's unfamiliar. So it's going to take a little while. Don't beat yourself up about it. So for me, for this process, like, I've been, working in 3D for a while. So this little scene took maybe 15 to 20 minutes to put together. All right, and so the shader. So unlike the last time, we did not have the shader set up. So when you import an image as a plane, it will automatically set up the shader for you. So you can make it from scratch by creating a new shader and then just plugging in your image into the base color, using your UV coordinates to position it. You could do that, or you could just do the Shift-A import image as plane like we did earlier, and that will create a shader profile for you, and then you can just assign that shader to these objects. Cool, so now that process is all done, and let's go, and then we'll do the UV mapping, which for most people is the most intimidating part of the process. UV mapping has like a really bad reputation. But here, check this out. So this is project from view. So I'm going to select. So when we first assign our shaders, I should say, when you first assign your shader to everything, it's going to be all crazy like this, and you might be tempted to go, "Oh my God, I screwed something up." You didn't screw it up. We just need to position the UV coordinates of our low poly model to match the illustration. That sentence is probably not going to make a whole lot of sense to you if you've never worked in 3D before, so don't worry about it. You can just follow this procedure exactly and it should be fine. So we will select everything, go into edit mode, we'll hit U for the unwrap menu and hit project from view, and then it will project the illustration coordinates onto your model automatically, which is a little hard to wrap your head around. I know. I'll do it one more time. Here we go. Project from view, and boom, there we go. So now everything is set up exactly where it needs to be, and it automatically starts working with light. So now we can start playing with the lighting of our scene. Whoops, I didn't mean to escape. Next slide. All right, so here is our scene, and it's rendered in 3D. And you can see, even though it's a 2D image being kind of projected onto a 3D object, it kind of holds up pretty well. If you're not paying attention, like too much of the sides, like it's kind of hard to notice. And so here, I have a sun lamp, and I'm just changing some parameters of the sun. The angle will soften the cast shadows. And I'm playing with the angle of the sun right here, and I'm about to make a happy accident. Check this out. So I'm playing, trying to find a position that looks nice, kind of trying to match Tanta's original, and then boop, right there. I noticed something really cool. A beam of light goes between these two shelves, and then hits the character, the focal point of the illustration in a really pleasing way. That's very naturalistic. I think that's so neat, and that's something I probably never would have thought to do earlier if I was just trying to like come up with lighting from my imagination. So I hit F12, and it's rendering, and it's done. So here are a couple different variations. Here's one night. I'm imagining like, oh, there's like a club or something on the inside, and they're like just having a little moment together outside the club, and like maybe there's a street off to the side and it's raking some kind of harsh red light coming in from the side. Or maybe I think Tante, this was a painting from life when she was in Osaka, I think. And I was in Osaka once, and it was like 96 degrees in August, and it was brutal. And so this time I wanted to capture that feeling of of just the super harsh, because there's a lot of bright like white light concrete, and so the sun just ricochets off of all this blinding white concrete. So here I did a really intense sunlight with some bounce light, and even though this is a 3D render, you can still paint over it, right? So like I painted, since these characters are on a flat plane, right? So I painted a little underglow, on their faces, and I put a little magic pixie dust on the ground to just get that super hot sort of feeling. And I think I may have even dropped the contrast up in this corner so that our eye goes here. Or you could do rain scene. So this one is like a super simple. I just took all the sun lamps out and had a neutral diffuse global illumination, and I just did some quick and dirty raindrops, rain streaks with some more splatter on the ground. But it's pretty convincing. At least I think it's pretty convincing. Or you could do, this is like, I think of this as like the sunset in the Mission District in San Francisco often feels like this. So a really warm sun, low angle coming in from the other direction. So there you go. One simple painting, like 20 minutes of modeling, and then we have three or four totally different color keys, and the color keys happen really fast. Like you could knock out, I mean, I don't know if it's a good practice to do this, but you could easily knock out like 10 color keys off of an image like this in like, a half hour, depending on how much love you want to put in, or like how much searching you want to put in. So I think that's pretty cool. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking like, okay, that was cool and all, but I still don't know how to use Blender. Well, what do I do? So I'd say that, so this course is mainly here to just let you know that these options and workflows exist, and they're super easy to start working in. And so now I want you to go do this tutorial series. This is Blender Guru on YouTube. Oft imitated, never duplicated. I did the Blender donut tutorial back when it was like 2.7, Blender 2.7. So this series will teach you more than you need to know to do my whole process. So go set aside a weekend, do this whole tutorial series, and then come back and then try and just replicate some of the stuff that I did here. And I think you'll be surprised with the results. So go out there, have fun, explore, carpe diem, YOLO. Yeah, you get the picture.